The Movie Health Podcast is proudly supported by Telemoods by eClapper Project Inc. Telemoods recommends which movies and TV series to watch by matching the user's mood and real-time offer of all streaming platforms. Download Telemoods today.
Welcome to the Movie Health Podcast, where we talk about movies and mental health. I'm Catherine, and today we talk again to Heather Hoagland. Heather has a private practice and uses cinema therapy to assist her work with men and women in addressing trauma, anxiety, and communication. Welcome back, Heather.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's so good to have you back. Today we're talking about Inside Out 2, which is in the cinema and doing extremely well. I know that in the box office it's hit over $1 billion worldwide. And, obviously you and I watched it. I know that you watched it for the second time. And I've heard a lot of emotional responses from people who've seen it and how relatable it's been for many people. So with this sequel to the first Inside Out, which was 9 years ago, we follow Riley, who's now 13. And I just have to say, and I think you and I both agree that this film is perfect for cinema therapy. It's very emotionally intelligent. It has many great actors voicing the emotions, but most notably Amy Poehler as Joy and Maya Hawke as Anxiety. So I still haven't used it in my practice yet, but I plan to. But I know that you have, Heather. So can you tell us a little bit more about your experience of the film?
Yeah, so with my practice, obviously I'm not showing it in the, in my practice because that would just be piracy at this point. But I am speaking. I am speaking to clients about it and encouraging them to see it, and then we talk about what's going on. A lot of the conversations that we're having around this movie center around anxiety and compassion, and a lot of my clients, again, I work mostly with adults. They have really enjoyed the movie when they've seen it. And it's been a very interesting sense of even just sitting in the theater and being amongst like little kids and teenagers and adults and seeing the difference of how different scenes hit. Because for the kids, they're having this understanding of these emotions that might be coming soon. There's teenagers that are experiencing the emotions as they're currently happening, and it gives them an opportunity to put a voice and to be able to communicate it more clearly. And then for adults, I think it's very healing because of just how much anxiety is present in adulthood.
Yeah, it is so relevant in all stages of life. And, in terms of the emotions, so in the first one, we have joy, sadness, anger, disgust, and fear. And in this one, we're joined by new, let's say, more sophisticated emotions, anxiety, embarrassment, envy, ennui, and nostalgia. And obviously, this is around the adolescent stage. It's a very funny and clever film, and it's ultimately about how change is scary. So with Riley, her priority is belonging and fitting in around her friendships and around her hobbies and passions. So specifically hockey as the sport that she loves. She's also forming a sense of self. Would you like to speak more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the way that they put this all together, and I'm definitely want to talk about some of the stuff I found out behind the scenes regarding the consultants that went into this film, because they're brilliant in who they are, and it really feeds into the stuff that we're going to talk about with regards to compassion. But with regards to how they personify it, they have these memories, and the collection of memories develop a belief, and then from those beliefs creates the belief system, is what they call it in this. And the belief system then forms the sense of self. So at the beginning of this movie, we see the sense of self as I'm a good person. And a lot of that is because of Joy cultivating the memories that go into the belief system. And so one of the things that Joy will talk about is, keeping the positive ones that she wants to send to the belief system or to long-term memory, but the ones that are more negative, she says we keep the best and we throw out the rest, and they go to the back of the mind, is how they put it. And with the belief system, there's these individual, almost like guitar strings that are connected to the sense of self, that each one of them, when you strum it, it's a different memory that feeds into that sense of self. which is important in how the rest of the movie kind of changes and alters.
Yeah, yeah. And in terms of keeping the best and tossing the rest, obviously there's also a scene in a vault where the emotions are literally suppressed. What did you think of that scene?
I love the idea that there's these suppressed emotions, because we, as adults, we talk about this all the time. In therapy, we talk about it a lot, as these suppression emotions. And literally in the movie, they put them in a jar and bottle them up, quote unquote, and send them to the vault, where they're met with, the first crush that was kind of embarrassing because it was a video game player or a character that was also had a weird sort of attack move. And then, the preschool sort of, Dora the Explorer, Mickey Mouse Clubhouse kind of vibe of this character that she loves, and according to the character, she still loves to this day. And then the deep dark secret, which is just this giant sort of gargoyle looking guy that's kind of covered up and won't tell what the deep dark secret is at that point. They do tell it at the end of the movie, but being able to have this place that's just the vault of where we want to just try to keep things all bottled up is a protective measure. I think that's very relevant to what people experience, with coming to therapy is, they come talking about things in an intellectual way or superficial way before we start really getting into, trying to unlock the vault, as you would.
Yes, yes. So obviously, this is a time of really intense and heightened emotions. I know that you mostly work with adults, and obviously, I assume that a lot of them have children or have adolescents. So what do they say are the main issues that they experience during this time?
In talking about their experience, a lot of it is more present as opposed to reflective, so their experience as parents or as adults that are experiencing anxiety. And I know for myself, as someone who has had anxiety and dealt with it, looking at this film as a clinician, it changed how I thought of anxiety and how I communicate anxiety. Because one of the things I used to refer to anxiety as in my practice is the gremlin. It's like a little gremlin that sits on your shoulder and kind of talks in your ear. And to me, like, I think of Gremlin from like the 1980s of like the movie Gremlin. So you have little Mogwai and as Gizmo, and then you have the Gremlins themselves and how they're very, very different. But with this movie, what it did was look at anxiety as this is a necessary emotion, that anxiety introduces herself as fear keeps Riley safe from the things that she can see. I keep Riley from the things that keep her safe from the things that she cannot see. And that's her whole thing. It's just, I want to keep her safe. And so when I talk to clients now about them experiencing anxiety, the question that I ask is, what is your anxiety trying to keep you safe from? And being able to also talk to anxiety. And I literally have the anxiety character doll. I just got it in the mail 3 days ago. Unfortunately, I might have to get another one because my son took it, and it's very odd to look at my son and say, "Hey, can I please have my anxiety back?" But with regards to anxiety and how I utilize it in discussion, we talk about the compassion that we can have for anxiety wanting to protect us, and actually just talking to anxiety when we are feeling anxious and saying, "Hey, I know you're trying to protect me right now, but I'm going to go ahead and be brave. And so I've got this." And I've tried it with myself, even, when I've had to even just get ready for the podcast, and getting everything together. There's a little bit of nerves because it's a very new experience for me. And I'll sit there and just go, anxiety, I know that you're trying to protect me, but I got this. I'm going to be brave, and I'm going to go do this. And it settles. It's really remarkable how that conversation with my own anxiety in a very compassionate way ends up being so much better, as opposed to really wanting to just avoid it or move it or get rid of it.
How do you think anxiety was personified in the film? Like, what did you think when you first saw her come on screen?
I loved how they did anxiety, and Maya Hawke is such a great voice for this character because she naturally has this anxious energy. And when she comes in, she's very frantic and is like, "Hi, I'm anxiety. What can I do for you? Can I take your laundry? Can I go ahead and get your coffee? Can I do this? Can I do that? Like, where do I put my bags?" And it's just very frantic. And then as anxiety kind of takes more of a center stage, we see her actually be helpful, in comparison to Joy trying to just be joyful and silly. And, it ends up getting Riley into trouble and embarrassment kind of takes over. But then anxiety kind of steps in and goes, oh, we need to have friends. This weekend can't be about our old friends. We have to make new friends. And so that's what this is going to be about, is how do we make new friends? And she's orange and she's adorable, but you can tell that she's just kind of frazzled. What I love also is in her being orange, you also see this change in Riley when it's introduced, when anxiety is introduced. When Riley's introduced, she's at the hockey camp and she puts on her jersey for practice, which is a white jersey with orange stripes. And that's when anxiety is more at that appropriate introduction. When anxiety really starts to take over and gets rid of the other emotions, Riley's uniform changes to orange with white stripes, which I thought was remarkable because it really, and when you don't see anxiety on screen in headquarters, you feel anxiety present in Riley when she's on the ice.
Mm. Yeah. And that's definitely a detail that I didn't notice, but I know you did on the second viewing. And like you were saying, anxiety, she genuinely believes that she's helping Riley, and she's not aware of the pain that she's causing her. And obviously, she's attempting to control everything. It's interesting, anxiety's relationship with fear. So fear kind of ends up admiring anxiety, and they're really like two peas in a pod. What did you think of their relationship?
I thought it was interesting. I like how they differentiate fear from anxiety in a way that I think is very palatable and very understandable. And it makes sense that fear would be like, I look to anxiety because fear is, I have to wait for the thing that's scary to be in front of me, as opposed to anxiety, which is I'm thinking about all the things that could be. So fear kind of gets to take a back seat a little bit and is like, oh, I like her. She has a plan. Anxiety has a plan. I know that she would have figured this out, Joy, and is a little sassy in that way. And so I like that they have that, difference, and being able to just have fear, also understand the importance of anxiety can't also take over everything. That he does recognize that Joy is right. We have to get back to headquarters. We can't let anxiety change Riley, because they also see it when they go to the imagination land and they see that they're using this imagination to create projections of all of these different things that could create a really bad situation for Riley. So I think that it's really important that fear has that opportunity to kind of say oh, okay, we do need to go back. We do need to do need to help Riley, because we know that anxiety is not.
Yeah. And with the projection scene, I thought that was really unique, and it actually shows the cognitive distortions. So there was a lot of catastrophizing, discounting perspectives and jumping to conclusions. And, to your point with self-compassion, I think this film is really a comparison between self-criticism and self-compassion. What did you think about how the other emotions were portrayed?
The other emotions, in regards to the older ones, we are already very aware of who they are. The introductions of the new ones, specifically, embarrassment, ennui, and envy. What was interesting in my kind of nerdish deep dive into the movie, they also had other emotions that they were thinking about, and they decided not to add them in. So there was Schadenfreude, guilt, and jealousy. And jealousy was supposed to be envy's twin. But they wanted to really have they found it hard to kind of discern the difference in a way that, would be understandable. And I love that it's envy instead of jealousy, because of just envy is like, oh, I love that hair and we want to have hair just like that. And it's not, oh, you have hair like that and I don't like that for you, so I'm going to go ahead and do this. And it's more anger. It's more, it's a different experience with jealousy. So I love envy. Ennui, I think, was just perfect. Instead of having it just be boredom, it was really kind of adding into it. And I thought that it was interesting that also with ennui, she also introduces sarcasm. which I thought was very interesting,
Mm.
because I never thought of ennui being the catalyst for sarcasm, but it did make sense a lot in that scene and how it came about. Um, and then embarrassment being this giant kind of like, pink sort of emotion that's constantly trying to hide itself in a gray sweatshirt. Really just personified, what embarrassment is like. And then we see when embarrassment touches the console, how it affects Riley so much with becoming very red and, really just kind of starting to
Mm.
wilt. And I think that, any kid that goes through puberty, embarrassment is an emotion that is just so unbelievably felt and understood.
Yes, yes. And I guess that's why this film is so smart, because it does deal with the complexity of the human mind and the human condition and experience.
Hmm.
Obviously, we need to talk about the panic attack scene. Um,
Yes.
that scene was just so powerful, and it really kind of demonstrates what a panic attack is like. So, would you like to speak about that?
Yeah, that scene with anxiety, anxiety taking over the belief system and trying to create a new sense of self is what leads to the panic attack. Riley's belief system goes from "I'm a good person" to "I'm not good enough." Again, I mean, I had chills as an adult hearing Riley's voice say, "I'm not good enough." It was like, oh, that hit a little too close to home for I think anyone in that theater that's over the age of like 18.
Yeah.
But being able to,
Mhm.
see how that change took place, and that that sense of self startled even anxiety and the other emotions that were kind of like, was it supposed to do that? And she's like, no, 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 it's fine. They'll make her work harder. It'll make her a better hockey player if she just wants to try harder. And she continues to try to push through while the other emotions are starting to kind of get wary about this change that's taking place. And as Riley keeps pushing and becoming hyper focused on getting three goals because that would make her better and hopefully get her on the team. She ends up running into a friend and from her home team and knocks her down, and she has to go in the penalty box. And now anxiety is just furiously trying to touch the console to like try to fix everything, but the more that she moves, what was interesting in that is anxiety moves so quickly that she ends up looking paralyzed. And there's this swirling vortex around her. And that I think was just so wonderful to be able to show people what it's like in someone's head that's experiencing panic attack. But on the outside, you see Riley, she kind of bangs her head into her stick and is like, come on, Riley, get it together. And her foot starts shaking. You can hear her heart rate. You can hear her start to hyperventilate. She's becoming less focused. She's just completely like almost looks like dissociation at that point. And it
Mhm.
really, showed in a really beautiful way of what a panic attack can look like. And have it be recognizable to the people outside of her. That's not the case all the time. And it's a conversation that I have with clients is that that is an interpretation of a type of panic attack. It's not what all panic attacks look like, because we do have people who have panic attacks that they don't have any physiological change. They just are internally they want to jump out of their skin. But I think that this is a really good
Mhm.
interpretation for people to see what it can look like. Because it would be too difficult to not have those physiological, noticeable sort of things for her friends to be able to clue into Riley's not okay if Riley's just sitting there freaking out internally. So I think it was beautifully done.
Mhm.
Um, you know, I think that it was really indicative of what the consultants, Dr. Keltner and Lisa Demore, who were the psychological consultants on the film. Dr. Keltner worked on Inside Out 2, Inside Out 1, and Soul. And then Lisa was brought in
Mm.
because she specifically is a psychologist with a focus on working with young girls and women. And so she has a book. I'm dying to read it. It came out in 2013. I'm sorry, 2023. Is Emotional Lives of Teenagers Raising Connected, Capable, and Compassionate Adolescents. And it's it sounds like a really great book, that you can see how she really played a great role in understanding what teenagers go through. The other thing that was really interesting about this film as well, with, talking about how connections are, talking about panic attacks, talking about how things internally are affected. Pixar hired, or they had about 9 13-year-old girls that came in, and they were known as Riley's girls because they came in and worked with the writers, they
Yeah.
worked with the staff there to give a perspective on what's going on and what it's like for them as a 13-year-old. And, God love them for being incredibly brave as adults that have advanced degrees and these really prestigious jobs, to have 13-year-olds come in and basically say, nope, you're not, you don't have it right yet, go back and try it again. So
Yeah. That was very bold for sure.
it was
But
definitely
it's interesting
bold.
that you mentioned Soul. Yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned the other movie, Soul. That's a really deeply insightful movie as well. And actually, it's not surprising that same people did Inside Out as well. Um, with the advisors, because I was watching like the cinema therapy channel when they were at Pixar, and they were talking about that actually, and how the director did so much research and obviously got these consultants on board, which is really great, because he wanted to make it accurate, obviously, as possible. I'm interested. Would you have done anything differently in this film?
Oh wow, that's a great question. um Honestly, there's nothing that I can think of that I would like to see different in how they portrayed. The one thing I would have loved, they did a great job of showing the other girls and kind of in their head a little bit, like specifically her friends from her home
Mm.
team. Um, and really showing disgust and fear, which I thought was really brilliant in how they did it, with her friends. When Riley finds out that they're not going to be returning to the same team together for the next year. One of the things I really wish, and again, it's just because I work with men, and I would love to have seen like some boy, some 13 or 14-year-old boy experiencing those emotions as well, and what their anxiety and what their fear and what their embarrassment might look like. It doesn't fit into the narrative of the film, and I understand it's a 90-minute film. That would have been a really kind of like thrown in there kind of thing, but it would have been a very interesting perspective. But again, Riley is the protagonist. She's the main character of this entire film. But I thought that would be something that I would want to see, as part of this film.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I mostly work with young men, so I think awareness around that would be really good. And obviously with radical acceptance and compassion,
Hmm.
that's something that needs to be worked on a lot. With all teenagers, with all people. I really like how the film also shows the positives of all emotions. So it doesn't, emphasize all the time about how, embarrassment or envy are negative, but actually what good comes out of them. I'm wondering, would you get? I know that you have the anxiety doll. Would you get any other dolls for your practice?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, um, in thinking about the adults that I work with, honestly, I think for my couples, I think I would probably get disgust if I could. Contempt and disgust
Mm,
is
yeah.
something that is very present in my sessions at times when working with couples. Um, and so that would be probably
Mm,
one that I would get. Sadness, I think, would be good. I think sadness is, incredible in the portrayal in the first movie, with how she also is a catalyst for empathy and compassion. Um,
mm,
and again, with what I learned about Dr. Keltner, because his work is pretty exclusively in compassion and pro social behavior. One of the things that he theorizes is how compassion is an evolutionary trait that we utilize in order to be survivalistic. And it's built into our nervous system through the vagus nerve, and we'll definitely talk about
mm.
that more in a little bit. But it really, you can see the connection of compassion for different emotions, compassion that we see in the relationship with Riley and her friends, which is really wonderful to see, because again, during that time, it can be really contentious with young women. And it was lovely to see that there was this compassion that could be woven through and understood. It wasn't the first thing that I picked up on when I watched it the first time, but when I started doing my deep dive and read about Dr. Keltner and then the books that he's done, and I was like, oh, I've actually read one of his books, and it started to make sense. I went back and watched it, and I really noticed the compassion that was woven so beautifully through. You see it within the emotions. You see it very deeply when one of Riley's friends on the ice, who she's in a fight with, they're not speaking at this point. They see Riley having the panic attack, and they go over and ask her, "Are you okay?" And along with that compassion, when Riley takes ownership of, like, I freaked out because you guys were moving away, and I was trying to fit in and try to make new friends, and I shouldn't have turned my back on you, and I'm so sorry, I shouldn't have done that, and I hope that you can forgive me. They have compassion for her and understanding, and are able to forgive her and be able to try to move forward from it. So again, this is something that was really beautifully done, as this web, that this woven sort of strand through the entire movie.
Yeah, yeah. And I really like how you mentioned that you would have the disgust doll in couples therapy. I would personally have anger. I deal with a lot of anger management issues, and I think even joy would be great, because just remembering our capacity for joy and that voice that we all have. I think that would also be great.
Yeah.
Would you like to talk to us a little bit more about the vagus nerve?
Yeah, absolutely. With Dr. Keltner's work, he talks a lot about the vagus nerve, which is cranial nerve number 10. It's one of the largest nerves in our entire body. It starts at the top of the spinal cord, moves down our neck by the jugular, and then through into our thoracic area. And so it touches nearly every major organ that we have internally. So the heart, the lungs, the digestive tract. It's largely associated with the medical field with the digestive tract, to the point where people who have large digestive issues will actually have their vagus nerve severed. And the reason why it's really important outside of the physiological medical community is that it's part of the parasympathetic response in the autonomic nervous system. So it's not a exclusively involuntary nerve response, because we can control our breath. We can control our heart rate through our breath, and which is what this does. And it's the response to the flight or fight response. And when we come out of fight or flight, the vagus nerve actually activates, which allows us to have that sense of calm. The one thing that he did with his research was with the vagal nerve is how it's connected to compassion. And watching a video of him talk about showing students pictures of suffering and having the vagus response activated, because it's touching into compassion. And that allows for people who have really toned vagus or nervous response, they can really balance and deal with their anxiety in a much faster way. It doesn't necessarily have to have the full activation. They can recover faster. The thing that's also important to recognize, though, is just like any sort of system, if it's overactivated, it can also be problematic. So if someone has too much activation in their vagus response, they can go into vasovagal syncope. They can also have really poor attachments to people that are dangerous. So, for example, with the vasovagal syncope, my sister, her husband had to have surgery, and it was an outpatient procedure. And so she's sitting there waiting. She's experiencing some anxiety because she's waiting to hear that her husband's okay. She goes back and sees that he's okay, and they're getting ready to get him to leave. And when she got into the elevator before they were leaving, she was overcome with vasovagal syncope and had to literally put her head between her knees and drink some orange juice because it was so intense, because she had been in this place of I was in such a state of anxiety and then going into a caretaker mode that I started to really get way too activated. The other thing that we've also seen as someone, we know that you've worked with uh, incarceration or with, people that have dealt with, criminal past, is that, one of the things that was always remarkable to me is how you would hear about women specifically who would work in the jail or in the prison that I was working at, that they would do things that they knew were breaking the rules. And it was because they had such a strong caretaker and compassionate response to some of the inmates that the inmate manipulated, and that resulted in them having this attachment to a very dangerous person. So again, it's just like anything. There has to be some sense of moderation with our vagus nervous response, because it is a caretaker nerve, as Keltner discussed, and we want to make sure that that's cultivated, because one of the things that they talked about and why this fits so well with the movie is that children, specifically fifth graders who have really good vagus nerve response, are more cooperative. They're more likely to give their time or to be able to give their things to help out other students, and they're more likely to intervene with bullying, which also speaks to why having good social emotional learning in schools is really indicative of having a safer school system, because of having children that are able to tap into that nervous response.
Yeah, yeah. So essentially, the vagus nerve is very important, and we actually need to be more educated about it. Because I think
Mm-hmm.
I heard about it years ago, but I know it's a term that I think is still kind of getting out there at the moment. So awareness would be great. Would you recommend any particular articles or books to read about it?
I think that looking at what Keltner is doing out in California, at Berkeley, he's part of the Greater Good Science Lab. He's the founder of it, and this is where they're doing a lot of that research specifically. He's been doing it for probably about, I think the video I saw him starting to talk about it was about 11 years ago, but what they've really been focusing on is how to connect not just the mind body experience, but the brain body experience. And I think that when people hear clinicians talk about nervous response or hormonal response, sometimes clients can kind of like not feel like it's based in science, but this sort of stuff is. And
Yeah.
because there's actual research that shows it, one of the things that I found working, especially with men, is trying to get men to focus on mindfulness and gratitude and meditation, which are all different things that can be utilized to tone your vagus nerve, along with cold therapy. That's another one as well. But getting them to practice those things, anytime I talk to them about gratitude or mindfulness, I get this eye roll initially. And so when I can go to them with, this is the scientific reasoning, and here's the evidence that shows why this is important, they tend to attach to that reasoning on an intellectual level and are more willing to go ahead and step in. And I think that sometimes as clinicians, we don't we try to stay in our lane, but sometimes we don't realize how our lane has a little bit more wiggle room to talk about physiological experiences, because we're so focused on what the mind is going on, that we also have to be very educated on the brain and the spinal column, because of all the evidence of what happens with trauma and anxiety and depression that are experienced in the body. One of the things that I loved about Inside Out 2 as well, with the recovery from the panic attack, we saw Riley practicing mindfulness. When she was coming out of the panic attack, she put her hand on the bench and is feeling the wood. She's hearing the skates on the ice. She's feeling the sun on her skin, and you see her breathing slow. Those are all aspects of mindfulness. It's not indicatively said that's what's going on, but that's what I recognized it as. And this is, again, really important to come out of that fight or flight into that vagus response nerve, is utilizing the mindfulness to help her do that and get back to a place of calm.
Yeah, yeah. And with the Vegas Nav, I work with a lot of parents and carers, and I know they experience carer burnout and compassion fatigue. So that's very relevant and essential to look at. With the panic attack, it was, like you said, it was the catalyst for something to happen where all the emotions ended up embracing each other and themselves. What did you think of that scene, kind of
So
ending
what
the
I loved about
film?
that scene was they wanted to um, replace the sense of self, which was created by anxiety of I'm not good enough, back to I'm a good person. And what Joy realized in that
Mm,
moment was that she was doing the same thing that anxiety was, which is just picking and choosing what was going to be uh, cultivating that sense of self, and that they can't choose for Riley. They have to let Riley be Riley. And that's also indicative of all the
mm,
memory balls that Joy had jettisoned to the back of the brain because of how they got back to the headquarters. All of those balls that they had put in the back all had to come forward, and they went into the belief system. And what we saw with the belief system
mm,
specifically was we saw the different colors of the emotions start to come up through the sense of self and how conflicted they were. So we had, I'm selfish, I'm kind, I'm not good enough, I'm a good person, I want to be myself, but I also want to fit in. And you see this overwhelming compassion that I think was Keltner's way of kind of showing an activation of the vagus response in that way, of
mm,
her just showing compassion for all of these different conflicting thoughts and beliefs that Riley was having. And when they saw Joy go in, everyone went in, including anxiety, was invited in to embrace her. And in that embrace, in that activation of a possible vagus response, we see that calm. We see her heart rate slow down. We see her breathing slow down, which would all be indicative of a vagus response. And so these are really beautiful ways of showing again how compassion is so unbelievably powerful, and it's something that gets lost in, I think, how we deal with society right now. Is that everyone is really hard. It's hard to find people that are willing to be open with their compassion to other people, to themselves, to strangers. And that's just my sort of example within my country, especially I think post COVID, where everyone has this sense of trauma from COVID and not really knowing what to do and really kind of still in that sort of survivalistic sort of space. It's hard to have compassion when you're still feeling survivalistic.
yes. Yeah. And you talked about forgiveness before, from
Mhm.
Riley's friends. I'm interested to know, what did you think of the portrayal of Riley's parents?
I love Riley's parents because specifically mom, especially when Riley, puberty's kicked in overnight, and mom comes in and she's kind of like, oh God, here we go. And we see her emotions trying to say, okay, we practiced this, let's see how we do, and try to keep her calm and try to engage. And it backfires, of course. And then dad, trying to engage when he can, but being the embarrassing sort of dad. But they're very involved parents. They care obviously very deeply for Riley. And they're also just trying to figure out this entire thing as well. She comes back from camp and mom's so excited and is like, so how was camp? And you see Riley kind of going through her emotions. And then Ennui is just like, presses a button and she's like, it's fine. And you see anger and anxiety in mom's brain go, that's it, that's all we got. She was gone for 3 days and we get like 3 words. What's with the red streak in her head? Did she join a gang? Like, and it's just that inner monologue that I think as parents, we have to have, but it doesn't necessarily have, get translated into our actions. Because, you know, if we said everything that we thought towards our children, we would be in trouble, when we had those moments. So being able to have
Yes.
that filter between this is my experience in my brain versus this is what I'm actually saying, I think is important.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I'm not a parent yet, but I can empathize. I'm trying to see the perspective of parents as I watch these films, and as funny as it is, it's also very real. So, are there any particular other scenes in this movie that you wanted to speak to?
Um, I think the only other scene that really I think was a gut punch was when they try to get back to headquarters. it's got foiled by anxiety, and Joy is sitting there saying, what am I missing? What am I not getting? And she's sitting there, and the other emotions are coming over, and like, what do we do, Joy? And she just says, I don't have the answers. I don't know how to stop anxiety. Maybe she's right. Maybe as you get older, you feel less joy. And that was like, such an emotional gut punch, as an adult, that, experiencing joy leaves adults very vulnerable. Brene Brown talks about how the most vulnerable emotion, or the hardest emotion that we can experience, is joy, because it leaves us incredibly vulnerable. And we also have so many responsibilities, and we have kids to take care of, or we have pets, or we have jobs, or we have things that we need to do that get in the way of allowing us to experience joy. But one of the things that we have to condition ourselves back to is allowing ourselves to not move from one crisis to another. In my practice, I talk a lot about clients that will say, okay, I'm in this crisis. This is really hard. I'm getting through it. Okay, on to the next one. I'm in this crisis. This is really hard. I got through it. On to the next one. Of just taking a second just to go, I'm really appreciative of it, that I got through that. I'm really proud of myself for getting through that. I'm going to allow myself to be open to being silly and joyful. I mean, as a parent, that's one of the things that I found myself experiencing the most joy was, or having a return to joy, was being able to experience it with my child. And having a child that's neurodiverse, I have an autistic child, that movies like this are actually really helpful. And I saw some articles, news articles, not journal articles, that were talking about how for people with autism, these movies have been really helpful in being able to have a better understanding of their emotions and what's going on in their head, but also specifically how it correlates to other people and how to have some sort of connection or understanding of others, which I thought was remarkable. And I look forward to kind of seeing how my kid kind of interacts with it, and some of my clients who are on the spectrum, or have some sense of neurodiversity. You work with some people who are neurodiverse, correct?
Yes. That's
So
right. Yeah,
I would
mostly.
love to know like how they would, experience this movie in having a deeper understanding of themselves or of others.
Yeah. I'll actually be speaking to a client who has autism next Wednesday, so I will get back to you on that. But I did have a long-term client who has autism as well, and she mentioned how much she loved the movie. We're yet to delve into the details of it, but she did cry, and we were talking about how it is just so emotional, and like you said, there are quite a few gut punches in this film.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess when people young kids will find it entertaining but also relate to it to some extent, but I guess in the present moment, like adolescents will be like, oh my gosh, this is exactly what I'm going through right now. So I think it's just so powerful, and I would love to do like cinema therapy groups on it, and I'm curious, like, would you also do that once it's out on Disney?
So I would love to, I'm going to start with it definitely in, working with couples, because I have couples, I'm thinking of couples that I'm working with currently that they have a partner who has anxiety, and they don't really understand. They understand the feeling of anxiety, but they don't understand the pathology of an anxiety attack, or someone who has issues with anxiety or an anxiety disorder, or even trauma for that matter. So it's one of the things that I definitely am going to show in there. I think with groups, thinking about some of the groups that I would do, particularly with men, is allowing them to have a space to really understand and experience emotions beyond anger. One of the reasons why, when you mentioned like not of possibly having anger in your office and talking about it as an emotion, for me, in the work that I've done, I think that having the physicality of anger for some of my clients would put the focus on the experience of anger as opposed to what goes underneath that, and wanting to get them into a little bit
Mm.
deeper sort of cohesion of understanding their emotions. But
Yeah.
that, I think, would be a really beautiful way. One of the things that I've done with kids, and I've also talked to parents about this, is that love the film, is just taking small little round pieces of paper for some of their kids that they might not be able to voice or understand what their emotions are entirely, but giving them the crayons to be able to color in their own memory ball, quote unquote, that they can really show their parents what that experience was like for them and what emotions went into that experience in that time. And also the other thing I'm thinking of too, in working with groups, especially with adults, is those memory balls change over time. We saw in the first movie that Joy, there was core memories that Joy had that were 100% joy, but then when sadness would touch it, they would become sad. And I think that that's also important to kind of look at with trauma, with anxiety, with depression, as I work with them, is that there's memories that they've had as children that they look back now as adults that could be a different color. And being able to discuss the difference in those colors and how time and development and a change in your sense of self or a change in development and understanding of your emotions can change how that perception is from when you're a child to when you're an adult.
Yeah. And it's very true what you said about anger as well, and then underneath the anger iceberg. So in that way, it would be helpful to have sadness and fear as well. Like an underlying anger and like personifying that with clients.
Yeah, and embarrassment as well. I think embarrassment would fit into that.
Yeah, and embarrassment. Yeah. So I mean, I guess we could just have everyone, the whole gang, the sophisticated emotions and the simpler ones.
I know. I would just need Disney. I would just need Disney to send them as like a box set, because I would spend way too much money with Disney to get all of them. If that's the case. And I'm a social worker, so that's how to be able to spend hundreds of dollars on emotions through Disney.
I completely understand as another social worker. Yes. But yeah, was there anything else about the film that you wanted to mention today?
I mean, I think that the thing that I think is really important with this film is, the conversations that take place afterwards, being a parent, trying to get kids to understand what anxiety is, hearing. When I went to the film, I saw it by myself. And so I had the opportunity when I was walking out to kind of overhear some conversations that were taking place. So I had adults talking to their children about anxiety and kids asking, like, do you have anxiety? Like, and these are 7 or 8 year olds, and then hearing teenagers talk about, oh yeah, I remember, like, what that was like, or feeling alone and not having friends, and then feeling really close to people. So it was really remarkable to see the different conversations that took place afterwards. But I think that the biggest thing is, as we talked about before, the kindness and compassion that we need to show to ourselves. That being able to show ourselves kindness and compassion and giving ourselves a lot of grace, as we talk about a lot in therapy, is so unbelievably important in order to be able to get through difficult times. As we see with the connection with our brain and our nervous system with the vagus nerve, and how that is important to have that activation in order to help us get out of that fight or flight response. And so being able to encourage people to be kind, encouraging children to be kind to one another, so that way we have these kids that are, I think Keltner calls them vagus nerve superstars, is that they have this ability to really have an understanding of themselves and be able to regulate well and have an understanding of their peers, which is only going to make things better for generations that are coming up in a very difficult world.
Yeah. And, it's like what you were saying before about Damore's book about raising connected, capable, and compassionate teenagers. I think that's the ultimate goal, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And, this movie. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a, trying to have that compassion, with teenagers, and also making very compassionate adults. And then also looking at, what Keltner's books of Awe and Born to Be Good and The Power Paradox, which talks a lot about social media, I think are also really important books that I would put on any reading list. He also has a podcast, but people should listen to this podcast first before they start venturing over to Keltner's. But he also has a podcast where he talks about this stuff as well.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Heather, speaking to me about Inside Out 2 today. We talked a lot about anxiety, about how it shows the complexity of the human condition and human emotions, about compassion, the vagus nerve, and just overall how all emotions contribute to who we are, all our memories, which form beliefs, and form our sense of self ultimately. So thank you very much, Heather.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much.
The Movie Health Podcast is proudly supported by Telemoods by eClapper Project Inc. Telemoods recommends which movies and TV series to watch by matching the user's mood and real-time offer of all streaming platforms. Download Telemoods today.